tonight's public hearing on the county's FY 2024 proposed operating budget. I am Board Chair Christian Dorsey presiding this evening, and joining me are Vice Chair Garvey, board members Katie Crystal, Matt DeFerranti, and Takis Karantonis, who will be joining us shortly. Over the past several weeks, the board has held work sessions to discuss budget recommendations with various county agencies. We've also heard from many of our advisory commissions, and our role this evening is to hear from members of our Arlington community on the needs, programs, and services which are most important to you. We will also hold a public hearing on the proposed tax rates and various fees and code amendments this Thursday, the day after tomorrow, March 30th at 7 p.m. The online sign-up form for Thursday's hearing is available on the county board's website or by calling our board office at 703-228-3130, weekdays between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. The board will act ultimately on the FY24 operating budget, calendar year 23 tax rates and associated fees and code amendments at our April 22nd county board meeting. Before we begin public testimony, we will hear a brief presentation from our county manager. So I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Schwartz, and then I'll get into procedures for the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Richard Stevenson has a 5-slide presentation, and over to you, Mr. Stevenson.
All right, thank you. I'll be brief. So this evening, I'll walk through a few slides highlighting the proposed budget before we get started with the public hearing. As we've moved through the current fiscal year, we continue to see improvement in our local tax revenues. We are still, however, dealing with continuing expenditure pressures from the COVID-19 pandemic, specifically in some of our human service programs. And as the manager's proposed budget continues to invest in a number of priority areas, for example, schools, housing, mental health, and capital infrastructure, just to name a few. And looking ahead, beyond FY 2024, we continue to focus on the areas of revenue and expense, which may see some pressures due to demand, inflation, interest rates, and other macroeconomic factors. So, guided by the board's direction in the development of the proposed budget, the FY 24 budget totals about $1.54 billion for the county's general fund. The county's operating budget is just over $933 million and is a 2.1% increase from the current fiscal year. And following the principles of revenue sharing with schools, the total revenue transfer totals $607.6 million, a 4% increase in the county's funding to the school system. So when the process began last fall, it was projected that ongoing expenditure needs would outpace revenues. And however, with the continued growth in local tax revenue projections and higher than anticipated real estate assessments in January, increases in revenue streams helped close that funding gap. On the expenditure side, the manager did propose about $5.5 million of expenditure reductions, along with various expense savings from county investments in our Maplewood solar farm, lower debt service due to delays taken in the issuance of debt, and projected personnel savings from the continued difficulty we have in hiring various types of positions in the workforce. And then finally, some one-time funding was utilized to bridge us to FY25. So here on this next slide, we can see the timeline that the chairman just outlined. Tonight and Thursday evening, we are hearing input from our community on the budget and taxes. And then, as mentioned before, the process will conclude with budget adoption at the April board meeting, and our fiscal year starts July 1st. And then finally, I'd like to share with those joining us tonight where you can find additional information on the budget. The county's budget webpage has many resources with both video and written materials summarizing the recommendations in the proposed budget, and we've added a QR code to link to the county site. And with that, I will turn it back over to the board chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stevenson and Mr. Schwartz. We are now ready to hear from our public speakers, but a few things to keep in mind. Speakers can sign up for this hearing both in person and online at arlingtonva.us government/county board, and you can do so until 8 p.m. this evening. After 8 p.m., no speakers will be able to sign up. For those who are here in person, as you come up to address the lectern, you can adjust it to a height that suits your preference by using the up or down arrows, which are located to the right. You don't have to do anything with the microphone. It is on and should stay on. Please make sure you speak directly into the microphone so that everyone can hear your comments. And if you have any documents that you'd like to submit for the board, please hand those over to our clerk, Ms. Jacobs, who is to your left, and make sure that your name and contact information is included on all documents. For those of you who are joining us remotely, please make sure that you keep your microphones muted and your cameras off until you are called to speak. You can unmute yourself if you're joining us by phone by clicking *6, or if you are using Teams via an app or browser, you can click the microphone button on the toolbar. Please make sure that you end your comments as soon as your speaking time has elapsed. For those of you who are, or for all of you, you'll hear a 30-second warning when you should begin wrapping up your comments before a beep that is much more obnoxious when your time has concluded. And if you do wish to submit written statements in lieu of any oral presentations, you may also do so at any time by writing to all of us at countyboard@arlingtonva.us. Madam Clerk, will you please call our first two speakers?
Yes, our first speaker is Jennifer Owens, followed by Jill Norcross.
Jennifer Owens, President and CEO of the Arlington Community Foundation. Our Shared Prosperity Initiative is laser-focused on the needs of our neighbors living at 30% of our AMI and below. Our comments today on the manager's proposed budget are driven by our concerns for how this vulnerable group is impacted by the choices we make, including one of our most important choices as a community, how our tax dollars are spent. Specifically, I'll speak to recommendations related to deeply affordable childcare and deeply affordable housing. In 2018, the County Board accepted in the detailed Community-Informed Childcare Action Plan, which provides a roadmap for how to achieve our goals for every child to have access to safe, affordable care. We recently released a report that reviewed the plan's recommendations against our community's progress. In the 4+ years since the Child Care Action Plan was adopted, the number of licensed affordable childcare slots has increased by only 147. This means there are still fewer than 450 affordable slots to serve over 3,300 Arlington children under the age of 6 who live in households below 60% AMI. And about half of those more than half who live below 30% of our area median income. Families who must forego work because they lack childcare can't pay for their basic needs and face a higher rent burden because they don't meet the work requirements for a housing subsidy. The nonprofit sector and philanthropic organizations cannot address this critical need alone. We are joined by many in our community in asking for deploying the $5 million in funding set aside last year for affordable childcare infrastructure and adding a full-time employee to the budget focused on the Child Care Action Plan implementation. This issue is important enough for us to have at least one person in our county government who wakes up every day with the goal and mission of addressing this critical childcare shortage. I'll ask for, in this last 10 seconds, that you also in housing look at the $5.5 million in ongoing AHIF funding, increasing that to bring that to the same level as housing
Thank
grants.
you, Ms. Owens. We
Sure.
appreciate it.
Our next
Thank you.
speaker is Jill Norcross, followed by Max Ewert.
Thank you. I'm Jill Norcross with the Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Alliance, and I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight in support of an increase in funding for affordable housing as a representative of a regional organization working to meet the diverse housing needs of Northern Virginia residents. First, we'd like to acknowledge Arlington County's success in increasing the housing production by growing the Committed Affordable Units, or CAF, portfolio 28% between fiscal year 20 and 22. And we also applaud that the number number of CAFs serving less than 30% AMI nearly doubled during that time. We understand the context in which Arlington has had to address a significant revenue shortfall coupled with spiked interest rates and increased costs in general. Unfortunately, as you know, the FY24 proposed $9.5 million for the AHIF is approximately half of last year's FY23 allocation. In order to achieve the county's stated goal of 17.7% of the housing stock at 60% AMI or below by 2040, the county still needs over 6,500 CAFs. To get there, Arlington will need to commit $38 million each year for the next 17 years to finance the 380 units needed on an annual basis. At a minimum, we suggest increasing the AHIF funding to FY23 levels, or $18.7 million. There are several upcoming projects for CAFs that are at risk of not having AHIF funding, including the Serrano Apartments, Crystal Houses, Marbella, Arlington View Terrace, Lucky Gardens, and the Goodwill site. Separately, we'd like to affirm the steady funding proposed for housing grants at $14.5 million, as well as the county's efforts to fund eviction prevention at the amount of $3.6 million. We appreciate that Arlington is a regional leader when it comes to sound, affordable housing resources, policies, and programs. Now is not the time to fall short of your well-researched and articulated housing goals by committing to only 1/4 of the AHIF resources needed to achieve the county's goals. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Max Ewert, followed by John Musso.
Good evening. My name is Max Ewert. I'm an associate planner with the Department of Parks and Recreation, but tonight I am speaking on behalf of my union, AFSCME Local 3001, which represents Arlington County employees. I'm going to speak on two topics tonight, staffing and compensation. Regarding staffing, I empathize with the county's position. The county must be able to function, and I appreciate the county manager's proposed budget, which limits the amount of filled positions that are being cut. The vast majority of cuts to staffing are unfilled positions. However, I urge county board members to try and find ways to mitigate these cuts. Many of us are still feeling overworked, and just because there are fewer planned employees does not mean the work will slow down. Additionally, a universal issue that we have heard is the length of time the hiring process takes. We have heard of many instances where positions have been offered but denied due to the prospective employee finding another position during the hiring process. Making these changes would go a long way to preserving the mental health of county employees and the quality of service that we provide. With compensation, this is a call to action to all union-eligible fellow employees. The proposed budget includes a 4.5% raise and $2,000 bonus. This is exactly what was negotiated for by the Service, Labor, and Trades Bargaining Unit. This is what was won without a formal union contract by a single bargaining unit. Imagine what we could win if we all came to the table together. Improved racial and gender equity, increased wages, flexibility in healthcare coverage, a better retirement plan that serves our needs, flexible schedules, consistent telework, and a 32-hour work week are all things that could be on the table, and more. Come find me, make your voice heard, and let's build this together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is John Musso, followed by Brian Lynch.
Good evening, members of the County Board. I'm John Musso, Government Affairs Manager at the Arlington Chamber of Commerce. Speaking on behalf of the Chamber, I would first like to thank county staff for all the hard work that's gone so far into the fiscal year 2024 budget. It's important the county is making tough decisions as we enter a leaner time for Arlington. That being said, we are asking the county to retain the positions of Assistant Director at Arlington Economic Development and the position of Associate Planner at CPHD. We believe that both positions are part of a greater investment in the ability for the county to achieve its economic and development goals and overall greater policy for Arlington. The Assistant Director position at AED is a vital role that's going to allow for the Director, the Deputy Director, and other AED executives to fulfill their primary responsibilities and directives. We concur with both the Economic Development Commission and the Fiscal Affairs Advisory Commission that losing this position would cause significant negative consequences. Regarding the CPHD associate planner position, we believe that as the department moves ahead with projects like Crown Langston Boulevard, the outdoor dining study, various land use studies, and the regulatory framework for missing middle, that it's imperative the department has enough resources and staff to adequately achieve all of these projects and goals and complete them and implement them in a timely and effective manner. We understand that the county is facing tough budgetary decisions as it moves ahead, but we strongly urge the county not to lose sight of how important needed resources are for these two departments in order to succeed with the projects they're tasked with and their efforts to promote a better Arlington. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is Brian Lynch, followed by Peter Cant.
Good evening. My name is Brian Lynch. I'm here tonight as the president of the Arlington Professional Firefighters and Paramedics Association, Local 2800 of the IFF. It is my honor to represent over 350 of our members, your firefighters. We appreciate the progress we have made working with management to get to a step and grade system. We are close, but we need your help. We believe that we have collaboratively created the first step, but still need to address the significant salary compression. Right now, firefighters in their 6th year of service currently make the same salary as the first-year firefighters they train. This is where the community needs your leadership. In an increasingly competitive labor market, communities are aggressively recruiting experienced firefighters. Without investments from the board, your 6th-year firefighters will be the lowest paid per hour of their peers inside and around the Beltway. This will exacerbate the existing problem where Arlington taxpayers pay to train firefighters for other communities at a cost of $100,000 to $175,000 per firefighter. Attrition is trending up significantly. 6% of our positions are unfilled, and your firefighters are on pace to work over 12,000 hours of mandatory overtime to keep the community safe. Fully addressing compression today is a significant cost. We believe that the time is now to make at least a down payment on this and identify the remainder as a priority in the budget guidance for the future. If steps are not taken today, it will become harder and more expensive to maintain the level of protection that Arlington families and businesses need and have come to expect. In our line of work, experience can mean the difference between life and death. Please keep that vital experience on Arlington streets. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Peter Cant, followed by Stuart Scott. Peter Cant. Okay, we'll move to Stuart Scott, followed by Claire Christian.
Can you hear me all right? Okay.
We can.
Good evening. I'm Stuart Scott with Eco Action Arlington. The proposed budget fails to address the climate crisis. It's short on initiatives to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The 23 budget gave me hope, a 2-person Office of Climate Coordination and Policy, $1 million action fund for things related to the 2019 energy plan. There was some follow-up. Bill Egger was hired to head OCCP, but the second position is dropped. How is Mr. Egger to function on his own? I'll focus on one area, electric buses. The 23 status of transit buses, ART 0, Fairfax 8, Alexandria 14. For schools, Arlington 3, Fairfax 18. What about coming years? Arlington Transit, 4 battery buses, 2 to 4 fuel cell buses in the next 2 to 3 years for a pilot study. Transition to electric buses starting only in 2028, 5 years from now. Meanwhile, the schedule is to add 15 new fossil fuel buses in 23 and 16 more after that. That's about 40% of the fleet. I believe that's a planning failure. I believe that's a management failure. Battery buses are feasible now. They're being adopted across our area, across our state, and across the country. The White House guidebook to the IRA states that existing technology and federal funding provide a path to reduce U.S. emissions by 40% by 2030. Won't Arlington work to be part of that effort? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Claire Christian, followed by David Cheek.
Good evening. My name is Claire Christian, and I am here tonight as the president of the board of the Friends of the Arlington Library, or FOL. FOL believes that Arlington's libraries are an essential resource for our communities. We are therefore supportive of the plan to engage the Arlington community in strategic discussions about the future of Arlington's libraries this year. We are also supportive of the proposed 9% increase in the library budget. It is clear that the county's past investment in the library budget has paid off. Circulation has increased, usage of the library's app has increased, and participation in library programs has increased. Moreover, last year's funding of the collections budget has resulted in reduced wait times for materials, which has also brought many more patrons to the library. This year's proposed budget will allow the library to continue those trends. Our libraries are the anchors of diverse communities like Arlington, supporting many individuals and families by providing access to books, technologies, and other programs, and in many cases, filling critical needs that would not otherwise be met. Unfortunately, not everyone in Arlington is able to fully enjoy these benefits. 18% of Arlington's 4th and 5th grade students still needed reading support at the end of the last school year, with Black and Hispanic students in Arlington needing reading interventions at a rate 2 to 3 times higher than their white peers. Arlington Public Schools have recently switched to evidence-based reading instruction, but there are many older students who have received inadequate instruction in reading and will need help to become proficient readers. FOL's mission is to support library programming as well as to increase literacy in our community. So tonight, we would also like to challenge the Arlington County Board to come up with creative solutions to address these unacceptable literacy gaps in our community. FOL is ready to support these efforts with matching funding. We look forward to hearing your proposals and working with our library partners to address this critical need. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is David Cheek, followed by Grace White. David Cheek. All right, Grace White.
Excuse me, in the middle of making dinner here, but I'm here to talk about the AHIF budget. In the most recent analysis of the Affordable Housing Master Plan, staff recommended we needed to spend between $35 and $50 million a year just in order to meet the goals we set out in the Affordable Housing Master Plan. Last year, we put the most money we ever had, around $18 million, which is still less than 40% towards that goal. And this year, it's taken a cut to $9 million. It's half as much as last year, and that's 20% of what we need. I know that we're not going to get to 35 or 50 million this year. I know that's a lot to ask, but I think there's something fundamentally wrong when we treat affordable housing, a basic human right, a basic human need, as something that we can simply fund at 20%. I think about schools, I think about sewers, I think about libraries. Would we fund any of these key programs at 20%, even 40%? And I think the answer is no. So, I'm going to ask at the very least we match what we did last year and come back to the table so that our goals in the Affordable Housing Master Plan are not just, wishful thinking, but like a reality, something that we're actually attempting to meet. So thank you for your time. Those are my remarks.
Thank you. Enjoy your dinner.
Our next speaker is Eric Burkey, followed by Tim Dillinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will, in the spirit of what you intend to usually tell folks, I'll try to keep this brief. So good evening, I'm Eric Burkey. I live in Douglas Park. I'd like to align myself with the comments of those concerned about our planning staff. I'd also like to align myself with the comments of Jill Norcross with regards to the funding of our affordable housing programs, and also agree with the previous speaker, Grace White, about those funding levels. My request is similar, that the board strongly consider funding AHIF to its fiscal year 23 levels of about $18.7 million. I do want to commend the board and the county for the leadership it's shown for really many years, especially the last few years, especially with regards to the assistance of the acquisition of Barcroft Apartments and the preservation of over 1,300 affordable units there. It's just an incredible accomplishment for our community, but one that does have real financial costs, and unfortunately those costs are more than we anticipated due to market factors, inflation, and et cetera. And so my understanding is that, our Affordable Housing Investment Fund dollars are mostly accounted for in the next year or so because of that and other commitments. And my request is that the board take leadership, like it has many, many times before, to increase that AHIF funding so we can provide more certainty. We've not had a NOFA process for the last 2 years, and it's really important that we dig deep and find more resources so that our affordable housing developer partners continue to do robust projects in Arlington and not simply just focus elsewhere. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Burkey.
Next speaker is Tim Dillinger, followed by Adam Theo.
Hi there. My name is Tim Dillinger, and I'm on the leadership team of the Arlington Pickleball Club. Now is the time to insist on earmarked funding for pickleball. We have struggled to get Parks and Rec to put resources toward pickleball, to everyone's detriment and with newsworthy consequences. As we've seen over the last few years, Parks and Rec does not put resources towards pickleball due to what they claim are budget issues. The Public Spaces Master Plan mandates that they work to meet demand for pickleball, a mandate that was enacted years ago. Surely by now they've established a target level of service like they've done for other sports, right? Nope, it's not in the budget. Other sports have designated contact person at Parks and Rec. Does pickleball? Nope, not in the budget. Long-term planning? Ha, not in the budget. How has that lack of planning worked out for us? Last July, they promised to buy some paint and stripe more courts this spring. Well, I see daffodils, but I don't see more courts. So there are plenty of nice to haves that I'd love to see. It'd be great if you'd open the rec centers at 9 a.m. on Sunday mornings in the winter, but I understand that money is tight for the nice to haves. But for the must haves, the last few years have taught us that Parks and Rec claims that it's not in the budget and neglects their obligations with newsworthy consequences. Do not give them permission to continue that neglect. Now's the time to insist on earmarked funding for pickleball. Thanks.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Adam Theo, followed by Alice Hogan.
Good evening, everyone. So I don't know if everyone's aware of this, but recently the county just passed missing middle housing reform. And that I'm very excited about. It'll go a long way towards affordability of housing for the middle class over the long term. It is not, of course, a silver bullet that fixes things right away, and it's not a tool for lower income folks. That's where the Affordable Housing Investment Fund comes in. So you can imagine that I'm very disappointed, to put it mildly, to see that the AHIF fund has been effectively cut in half in this proposed budget. And that even is originally far below where we needed to be, which was $37 to $48 million per year to be meeting our affordable housing targets. That is very frustrating. So I really want to see, well, I will also sort of break with Grace White, who spoke earlier, who said that she understands that we probably can't get to that 37 to 48 million point. I will break with that and say that is exactly where we need to be even this year. Yes, that's difficult choices. That's a tough budget to put together, but that is exactly why we have hired our wonderful county manager, Mark Schwartz, isn't it? It is your job, after all, to prioritize these things. And I would say right now, we're not doing a very good prioritization for affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Alice Hogan, followed by Peter Cant.
Good evening. Nice
Madam
to see
Clerk,
you.
I think we need to adjust these to 3 minutes.
You're right. My apologies. Thank you.
Good evening again. Nice to see you all. Thank you for all that you're doing to struggle with all the demands in the county. It's really amazing, and I know it's not an easy job. I'd like to echo a lot of the comments you've heard already this evening. And thank you first for the missing middle housing ordinance that we passed this week. Just truly an amazing milestone. Really creates an opportunity for different types of households in neighborhoods long closed to a variety of residents. That was an incredible budget neutral zoning tool that you all passed. And now it's time to turn our eyes towards affordability. As we heard many times, missing middle is not going to meet the needs of folks under median income in Arlington. And Arlington has done a wonderful job of attempting to meet those needs for decades. And here we are again. The county is changing. It's becoming more expensive. Our affordable housing problem is only getting worse. We learned this week that we are the 10th most expensive urban area in America to live, and that we are the most expensive for childcare. So folks not making that median income are falling farther and farther behind. And how do we make room for everyone that we need to make our community complete? I think we really need to think about housing as infrastructure. As things are changing, more people are coming here, the prices of everything are going up. What about the folks who just cannot keep up? And so when the county has a priority as major as housing, which we have for many years here, it doesn't make sense to have that priority be at the whim of one-time and annual funds. And so this year we see half the funding of even last year, which, as you've heard other speakers saying, is really a third or a quarter of what we actually need annually. It's just shocking to see us go back this far, this fast. I recall in 2020, right before the COVID crisis began, we were asking you all for $25 million, which was half of what we needed then. And to think we're 3 years later and we're looking at $9 million is just, it's discouraging, and it makes me realize we're never gonna get to these goals if we don't get really serious about figuring out a new funding source, making a commitment about a base amount of money that we can count on, that our nonprofit developers can count on going forward. As someone said, we haven't had a NOFA for 2 years. These tiny amounts, no one can plan. And so we have to figure out, how do we prioritize this and not have it be a one, every year we're redoing the budget, trying to figure out how to go forward. And so I really challenge you to figure out, how do we come up with money to really support 400 units a year? This is a massive amount of money, and 9 will never get us there. And I do want to affirm your eviction prevention, your housing grant, and please up your CAF inspection so everyone lives in decent housing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Peter Kent, followed by Carol Skelly.
Will this be for 2 or 3?
3.
3, but I won't make it that far. Good evening, everyone. I'm Peter Kant. I'm the chairman of the board of Culpeper Garden, and I really appreciate the time to be here and all the help that the county itself and the county board has provided to Culpeper. Of course, I'm speaking in terms of affordable housing for low-income seniors. We are very appreciative of the amount of money that the county has provided every year and will provide again this year. Of course, we are impacted by the huge cost increases in healthcare, specifically for our assisted living residents. Independent living, of our 350 residents or 330 residents, so-called residents, about a fourth or a third are assisted living. And as we've discussed, and you've made many trips and visited our facility and met our residents and met us, our assisted living residents do not have a federal fund capability or source. So there is HUD funding that goes for their housing, and there, of course, is Medicare funding for some of their more extreme health care, but assisted living is not covered. It's like a donut hole that sits there. And we appreciate the modest, about 1% increase in funding to Culpeper Garden this year, but that's not close to the 13% increase that we saw in our healthcare costs for our residents. We are doubling down on our philanthropy. We are working very hard to meet that gap. But we do ask, as the county looks at increasing housing stock and the like, that the neediest of our citizens, the one that is most often forgotten, are senior citizens and our elderly, who Culpeper has been the home for in assisted living and independent living now for 50 years, over 50 years, that we find some way to, with the discretionary funds, to hopefully increase the amount that can come from the county to help with the assisted living portion. We are looking at a longer-term plan and increasing the housing stock for both assisted living and independent living at Culpeper Garden over the next 10 years. But in the short run, we are looking for help specifically in that area. So Marta would love to be here. The rest of the board would love to be here. Marta is in Richmond today, making a similar appeal down in Richmond to the folks down there. So I'm carrying the onus as the board chair to bring that here. And I truly appreciate the immense amount of help and attention that the board has given to Culpeper. But again, those huge increases in costs, especially in assisted living, have been quite problematic. And I just wanted to make that, as the board is considering all the difficult choices that you have to make, to remember Culpeper Garden in that. So I really appreciate the time, and thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Carol Skelly, followed by Audrey Clement.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and board members. I'm speaking in my new capacity as a private citizen, but still in support of programs for adults with developmental disabilities, or DD, and also in support of the work of the Community Services Board. 2 years ago, when we were still in the depths of the pandemic, you prioritized day and employment programs for adults with developmental disabilities, and you asked the county manager to plan for sufficient capacity to meet current and future needs. Your leadership and the hard work of the county staff has resulted in a number of positive steps. The county commissioned a study of best practices. A consultant presented several innovative recommendations in December of 2021. One-time and ongoing funds have been allocated to open a new employment training program to be housed temporarily in the Sequoia complex with 15 client spaces. The program is expected to open later this year. And there's been renewed interest in expanding much-needed Arlington-based employment opportunities for this population. I also want to express gratitude for your generous support of the group home, which is being rebuilt on South Irving Street. This home will also open this year, and it will serve individuals who have intensive needs co-occurring with their developmental disabilities. Finally, and arguably most important, I would like to reiterate the need for additional permanent program capacity to be included in the CIP when it comes up for renewal next year. Despite the progress made to date, current and upcoming Arlington School graduates still have very limited options for engagement as adults. Barriers to employment remain high. DD clients often work only part-time, and some do not aspire to work, but still need opportunities for social interaction and participation in the community. So we need a clear-eyed, numbers-driven analysis, because this is a little tricky, of the projected needs in order to ensure that the planned capacity when it comes up in the CIP will be adequate. Thank you very much for your continued leadership and support.
Thank you.
Next is Audrey Clement, followed by Joan McIntyre.
Welcome, members of the board. I'm Audrey Clement, candidate for Arlington County Board. Inspection of the manager's fiscal year 24 proposed budget reveals the good, the bad, and the ugly. To the good is sustained funding for the libraries, which this year saw the reopening of a newly renovated courthouse branch and Sunday hours for the Westover branch. A Crystal City library is in the works, and the Columbia Pike branch will soon have a new home. Anecdotal evidence that Central Library is heavily patronized by users all over the region surfaces every year when about half those I approach to sign my ballot access petition decline because they live outside the county. No pun intended, but this says volumes about Arlington Public Library. Also to the good is sustained funding for Art Bus, despite a documented decline in ridership since 2019. As a regular Art Bus rider, I can attest to its dependability, even though most Arlingtonians don't use it. On the bad side is the freezing of several dozen sheriff's office and police department positions, despite a documented increase in serious crime. In a March 23rd County Board work session, Arlington Police Chief Andy Penn reported a 27.4% increase in larcenies, a 31.6% increase in motor vehicle thefts, and a significant increase in assaults since 2021. Yet the police department is 100 officers short of its authorized staffing level. Of concern is the addition of 21 FTEs in the Department of Human Services, DHS, on top of 34 new FTEs authorized in fiscal 23. DHS Director Anita Friedman insisted in a March 9th work session that these hires are needed to fill critical positions. Yet the lopsided attrition in law enforcement personnel as compared with the ballooning of DHS staff is indicative of robbing Peter to pay Paul, consistent with a de facto push to defund the police. As for the ugly, look no further than the real estate tax increase estimated at 4.7% for 2023. This brings the county's annual average 10-year effective real estate tax rate increase to 4.5%, or almost double that of the Consumer Price Index. The county argues that it's not tax gouging because the tax hike is driven by rising real estate assessments, not the tax rate. Yet the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors Chair Jeffrey McKay recently told his constituents, quote, "I will not support a budget that does not reduce the tax rate," end of quote. Would that Arlington County Board were so compassionate. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Our next speaker is Joan McIntyre, followed by McCoy Kaufman.
Good evening. I'm Joan McIntyre, Chair of the Climate Change, Energy, and Environment Commission. The IPCC just last week yet again noted that we face a rapidly closing window to prevent the worst consequences of climate change, and yet the FY24 budget calls for an 8% decrease in the air budget and the elimination of the second position of the new Office of Climate Coordination and Policy. We appreciate the initiatives underway to expand rooftop solar and public EV charging infrastructure and the transition of the sedan fleet for electric vehicles to electric vehicles. The proposed budget does not, however, provide adequate funds to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 50% by 2030 within Arlington. Most important, county residents, businesses, and property owners need information, assistance, and incentives to overcome perceived obstacles to reduce carbon emissions. High priority should be given to comprehensive retrofits for low to moderate income households, particularly existing committed and market rate affordable housing, building on current work underway by the AIR team at the Barcroft Apartments. Arlington can also build on and expand programs such as the Green Building Incentive Policy and the Green Homes Choice Program to help educate, engage, and incentivize the private sector to meet our urgent climate goals. The county government can also do more to lead by example, particularly in committing to transitioning the ART bus fleet to zero-emission buses and embracing electrification and elimination of fossil fuels in buildings as opportunities arise. The return on investment for the county and the community in terms of energy savings, improved air quality, and health would be substantial, and the county should develop multiple strategies to finance such initiatives. A starting point would be to allocate the $1 million of CEP funds this year, rather than over 2 years, and to invest the $2.6 million in savings from the virtual power purchase agreement to accelerate climate actions. In fact, that $2.6 million is a good indication of the economic benefits of investing in climate solutions. Securing federal and other funds and pursuing a green bank and community choice aggregation are other avenues. Addressing climate change requires a whole-of-community approach and, above all, leadership. We urge you to provide the leadership as the future of our children and community depend on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is McCoy Kaufman, followed by Julie Rosenberg.
Good evening. My name is McCoy Kaufman, and tonight I speak on behalf of Voice, Virginians Organized for Interfaith Community Engagement. Our fiscal year 2024 budget priorities include funding to address the greater need for rent support, grow Arlington's affordable housing supply, and implement the long-term strategies for aging CAF properties and recommendations of the Joint Subcommittee Serrano report. Given budget pressures, we welcome the proposed steady funding for housing grants, as well as the eviction protection funds, which will be critical with the end of special pandemic funding and current economic conditions. In housing supply, Arlington has made notable strides toward meeting the affordable housing unit goal in the Affordable Housing Master Plan. But even with the preservation of 1,334 units at Barcroft, the county is still short by more than 5,000 units. We're deeply concerned that a cut of almost half in the annual budget contribution to the Affordable Housing Investment Fund will jeopardize continued progress, and we urge you to find the funds necessary to restore AHIF to the $18.7 million allocated for fiscal year 2023. Please note that this amount is considerably less than the $37 to $49 million annually that your staff has estimated is necessary to meet the need. Still maintaining the fiscal year 2023 level can help to ensure funds will be available for much needed affordable housing projects being contemplated by Arlington's nonprofit housing partners for upcoming years. Once again, Arlington has been ranked one of the most expensive places to live, in one of the most expensive major urban areas to live. Now is not the time to decrease housing supply. Please ensure that AHIF will help us continue to progress towards meeting our critical need for affordable housing. We'll follow up with a more detailed letter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Julie Rosenberg, followed by Brian Coleman.
Hello, thank you for this opportunity. I'm here on behalf of the Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions, also known as FACTS, and I'm very concerned that investments in the 2024 county budget proposal still do not reflect the urgency we need to address the climate change crisis. FACTS creates partnerships among faith communities in Northern Virginia to develop local solutions to climate change because climate change is the ethical and moral issue of our time. And we want to reduce emissions, importantly, because we're faith-driven, we really are very focused on equity in energy and climate investments. We appreciate the investments that Arlington has made thus far that have helped position us to be recognized as a leader in climate action, and we really applaud the county for getting all the facilities powered by renewable energy 2 years ahead of schedule. But there's a lot more to be done. So here are a few specific asks. First, we really want you to leverage the $2.6 million in energy savings that we're getting from switching to all renewables and use it to invest in more zero carbon projects. Do not put it into fossil energy. On zero carbon investments, please stop committing to fossil fueled art buses. We know they're complicated transition consideration, but transition investments need to be aimed towards zero carbon solutions, which means electrified buses. We urge you to build infrastructure and invest in capital aligned with other transit systems locally and regionally. The future is electric, not fossil, not hydrogen. The Air Office is another topic. The Air Office is proposed for an 8% budget reduction, but we see a lot of opportunities that the Air team can be doing with these funds. Air could be working within the community, helping all of us learn what we can do to how we might leverage the new federal climate funds, and beefing up, for example, the Green Home Choice program that could help our lower income residents reduce their energy use and enhance their health and comfort. On housing, FACTS really appreciates your decision to pursue housing diversity in Arlington. We know climate considerations played a role in your courageous vote for missing middle. Please invest in this new housing to ensure it's using clean energy and it's climate resilient. We also want investment in workforce development, having the county lead by example and work with the private sector to incentivize training and hiring to grow a core of technicians who can operate the equipment that is key to transforming our energy systems. We are also big believers in green banks, and we urge you to dedicate funds so that Arlington is able to participate in the regional green bank that Fairfax County is going to be launching soon. Finally, but definitely not lastly in importance, another request is to ensure our new Chief Climate Policy Officer, who has a huge span of responsibility, can succeed in his job by funding staff support, as you did in the 2023 budget. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Brian Coleman, followed by David Leibson.
Good evening. My name is Brian Coleman, Second Vice President of the Arlington NAACP, speaking on behalf of the branch. The NAACP is very disappointed by the proposed $9 million allocation to the Affordable Housing Investment Fund. For context, that is roughly half of the funds of the last budget cycle, a quarter of what we need to reach our housing goals and a mere 1% of the overall budget. In the face of greater need for preservation and development of affordable units, this is a severely low level of funding. I call on the county to increase AIF funding to fiscal year 23 levels to ensure that the county has additional funds in upcoming fiscal years to contribute to increases in cap supply. At a minimum, add $5.5 million in ongoing funding to AIF to ensure parity between fiscal year 24 AIF and housing grant appropriations and earmark 10% of AIF for 30% of caps. The $14.5 million proposed for housing grants is all on ongoing funding, whereas only $9 million of the AIF funding is similarly situated. The county needs a permanent funding source for at least a base funding amount of $18 million. This will add predictability for affordable housing developer partners to trust. Additionally, the county should provide adequate funding for implementation of the long-term strategies for improved oversight and tenant support at aging CAF properties issued in April of 2022, and the recommendations from the Joint Subcommittee on the Status of Aging Properties Serrano Report issued in October of 2022, which would entail increasing staffing for CPHD Housing Division, including a deputy director position, including additional funding for CAF inspections for fiscal year 24, increasing staff to ensure all CAFs have an initial inspection by fiscal year 26, and that a reasonable inspection schedule can be maintained moving forward, and lastly, retaining the assistant planner position. Moreover, as indicated by the recently released Regional Fair Housing Plan, Arlington needs to do more to address its shortcomings and ensure access to fair housing across the county. It should begin to do so by providing adequate funding for the implementation of Regional Fair Housing Plan, a regular equity analysis for all housing and planning projects, and the implementation of the county's strategic plan to functionally end homelessness in the next 4 years. Luckily, as we've heard from the recent debate on missing middle, proponents and opponents of the proposal both agree that affordable housing is a necessity that the county must address. And so I hope and count on you to address this impending crisis. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker is David Leapson, followed by Courtney Massey.
Good evening. My name is Dave Leapson, and I am speaking this evening as board chair for the Alliance for Housing Solutions. Would note that this is our 20th year advocating for affordable housing, especially housing for our lowest income families. The Alliance supports the manager's proposed budgets for county housing safety net programs, housing grants, homelessness, eviction prevention, and others, all of which have been under a lot of stress. However, we are alarmed by the proposal to cut funding for AIF by half, especially at a time when everybody's talking about the housing crisis. Understand that our safety net programs themselves all rely on the availability of committed affordable units, CAFs, and that development of the CAFs relies on availability of AIF funding. That means that the budget for housing grants and permanent supportive housing would have to be substantially greater if AIF financed CAFs were not available. Others have already spoken about the numbers, so I won't repeat them here. But it is important to remember we have an affordable housing master plan that you all approved. At a minimum, we must increase 2024 AIF to the 2023 levels. And we really need, as has been said before, to establish ongoing funding and a realistic base that will in fact get us to the goals established by the board. It's also already been mentioned there's a long backlog of projects waiting for AIF funding now. Let us not forget that AIF is a revolving fund. Loan payments return to the fund. That means the less we budget now is the less we will have for future needs. Let us not forget, too, that AHIF leverages LIHTC tax credits, capital from developers, private financing from banks, donor-funded resident assistance programs. All of these things would go away or go elsewhere if we don't use them now. Perspective, the proposed AHIF budget in 2014, 10 years ago, was $9.5 million. That's the same as we're proposing today. Can't we do better than we did 10 years ago? This year's proposed AHIF budget is just 0.6% of the general fund budget, $1.54 billion proposed for 2024. Is that the best we can do? What does that say about priorities and
Thank you, Mr.
with the
Leibson.
plan?
Your time has expired. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Courtney Massey, followed by Craig Thompson.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes. My name is Courtney Massey. I am here tonight to speak on behalf of the Northern Virginia chapter of Showing Up for Racial Justice. I am joined by comrades here to ask for substantial reductions in the police and sheriff budgets in Arlington County and reinvestments of those funds into resources for community care, such as housing, which you've heard a lot about tonight. Here in Arlington, while they're often eclipsed by national news stories, stories of local police harm are regularly documented in the media and lifted up by local organizers. Police regularly deliver people in our community to sites of violence and even death in our Arlington County Jail. And according to their own use of force reporting, local police have been shown to use more force in situations involving Black and brown folks. In recent years, Arlington County has also, as you know, faced tremendous pressure from community activists to address its history of police cooperation with ICE. And according to a 2021 report, the use of force has increased, has more than doubled between 2016 and 2021. But even in situations where lethal force is not used against community members, Black and brown people face daily harassment, surveillance, and violence at the hands of our police. Unhoused people are particularly targeted, as are disabled people, all of whom have been victims of police attacks in recent years. Arlington County has spent millions of dollars settling misconduct suits and civil cases over the course of the past decade. Our local police have also participated in acts of violence against political organizers. The summer of the George Floyd uprisings, 2020, Arlington County Police were part of participating in the massive coordinated attacks on protesters in the DC area, and local police have attempted to intimidate and surveil organizing networks led by BIPOC and incarcerated organizers. But despite all of this documented harm, you are planning to increase the annual budgets for Arlington County PD and the Sheriff's Department. And as folks in this room have shown you, it is a time when our community needs deeper investment in affordable housing, education, healthcare. You must refrain from putting more of our money into harmful systems of social control. We're not safe with increased policing. We will only be safe when our communities are resourced and empowered to thrive. In the last few years, especially across the country, progressive leaders are working with local organizers to find alternatives to policing and imprisonment. The movement to divest from policing and invest in community solutions is growing, while Arlington County has held fast to protecting the status quo over its people. You have an opportunity to do better this round. We want care, not cops. Divest from policing in Arlington and invest in true community safety. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Craig Thompson, followed by Jane Green.
Long-term planning as opposed to one-time fees. Why is that important? So a lot of the previous speakers have already discussed the gap in the AHIF funding relative to not only what the county staff had suggested, so it's coming in at a quarter of what they suggested and half of the previous allocation. It then starts to beg the question whether we have less of a commitment and more of a pledge. Then you have to ask whether that gap in funding then starts to lead more resources having to be allocated towards eviction prevention. You already have a lot of the CAF market, which is very reliant upon Arlington-based nonprofits, Arlington Housing Corporation, AHC, plus Carmen Romero at APA. And If that becomes the case, where you can't really expect churches to come up with $200,000 every time you're trying to prevent 200 families from getting evicted on Columbia Pike, or for that matter, here in the Boston-Roslyn corridor. One of my former bosses is Manny Friedman. Manny runs about $7 billion worth of hedge funds here in Arlington, although the hedge funds are based globally. One of the things that happens with long-term planning is that when you have unrealized capital gains out in Silicon Valley and Wall Street, and you have these institutional investors, they want to be able to see things long-term. So when they look at LIHTC, they can't really look at things on a one-time annual basis. So he's able to go to them, which he did a few years ago, this is 2018, and he says, listen, we can raise $500 million for the opportunity zones because we have this LIHTC, we can hold the investment for 10 years. You have all these unrealized capital gains from all the software that's been disrupting everybody's livelihood and causing median wage stagnation. So that's why it's very important to look at AHIF from much more of a longer-term perspective. Because if you don't do that and everything is very short-term, it gets very difficult to try to incentivize the longer-term investment. You have, for example, by way of another example, Wesley Housing owns half of Colonial Village. Well, they've recently been able to negotiate certain transactions with the board in the city of Falls Church and the city of Fairfax, also in conjunction with the Lamb Center in Fairfax, where they can take over an old motel on Route 50 that's empty, just like a bunch of the office buildings in the area. And then they can actually convert that into permanent supportive housing. But it's only because of long-term planning that allows them to do that. That's why the point that Alice had raised earlier about long-term planning versus one-time fees is extremely important, because that way you can actually incentivize more investment. Otherwise, we're going to get a situation where Jones Lang LaSalle, Vornado, and others continue to just put up high rises with no CAF allocation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Jane Green, followed by John Bloom.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So much. My name is Jane Green. I'm asking that you commit to allocating $18.7 million to the Affordable Housing Investment Fund to match the level in last year's budget. Over the past few months, you've heard an outpouring of community support for affordable housing. I hope this priority is reflected in our budget. The Arlington County Board adopted the Affordable Housing Master Plan in 2015. To meet our goal to be an inclusive community, it outlined the need to add 600 units to our affordable housing portfolio each year. From 2015 until 2020, we averaged only 300 units per year. In the past 2 years, we've been quite above this average, mostly from the preservation of existing units. Even after the preservation of Barcroft, we are still net behind the Affordable Housing Master Plan goal of 559 units. Pulling back now is a mistake we cannot afford to make. In 2020, I was among many Arlingtonians calling on the board to allocate $25 million to AHIF. The 5-year Affordable Housing Master Plan review states that we need to allocate between $37 and $49 million per year to meet our goal. If we only allocate $9.7 million this year, it is unacceptable. Underfunding AHIF will cause cascading problems for years to come. Without new projects, we dig ourselves deeper into a hole at the same moment when we've almost caught up from our prior deficit. And if we don't loan out AHIF funds, we will not receive funds back into the program. This budget makes important and needed commitments to direct support for low-income neighbors, but these programs do not address the fundamental problem of Arlington's low housing supply for low-income families. AHIF is the only tool within your control that can increase the supply so that families who receive housing grants have a place to live. Please bring back AHIF funding to its previous level of $18.7 million and make a plan to go much higher in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our final speaker is John Bloom.
Good evening, Chair Crystal, members of the board, county manager, and staff. I'm John Bloom. I'm chair of the Sierra Club's Potomac River Group, which covers Arlington, Alexandria, and Falls Church. I see I'm batting cleanup tonight, so I will keep it short. First, a few quick observations. We are in a better place in Arlington in addressing climate change now than we were last year, due in large part to your leadership, for which we are grateful. Leadership is incredibly important in this area because because change is hard. Fossil fuels are very much like an addiction. The first answer when people are asked to switch to clean energy is almost always that it's too hard and we need to wait a few more years. From gas boilers to methane transit buses to diesel school buses, and the list goes on and on. Some jurisdictions are able to move forward and some aren't. The difference is leadership and a clear understanding of the speed and scale of action required. The top 5 budget recommendations from the Sierra Club this year are, first, to invest significantly in programs to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the community. We are making progress within the county government itself. We need to keep after that. The community work is essential and very challenging. It was a priority last year, and it's something that I think staff are struggling to really get programs planned and rolled out, and we need to keep after it. And we support, this was intended to be the main use of that $1 million CEP implementation fund. Didn't really work out that way, and we would support continuing that $1 million CEP implementation fund for this area in particular, and continuing to press in that area. Number 2 is to follow through on establishing a 2-person office of climate coordination and policy. This office needs at least 2 staff to reach its potential, and we'd be happy to discuss that in greater detail along the way, but we feel strongly about that. Number 3 is to require that significant policies, projects, and procurements funded through future budgets and the CIP are evaluated for their climate impact before approval. This is something that staff could develop a proposal, and I think we could get into place for the 2025 budget cycle. 4th is to fund work necessary to achieve Arlington's goal of 100% renewable electricity by 2035 through community choice aggregation. Is that it?
Thank you, Mr. Bloom.
All right.
All right.
I thought I got 3 minutes.
You did.
I did?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I don't want to keep you any longer. Have a good night. You have our letter.
Appreciate it. We do have your letter, and thank you for a lot of those who provided testimony, who've also sent in written materials. We do appreciate it. At this point, the public hearing on the FY24 proposed budget is closed, and board members will carry over action on this at our April 22nd, 2023 County Board meeting. Thank you again to everybody who was able to join us. If you are interested in the tax rate, fee changes, and code amendments portion of this budget process, join us on Thursday at 7:00 p.m. And if you're interested in the county board's discussion with members of the Arlington Public School Board, we will be convening on March 31st at 3 p.m. to discuss their budget request to the county. As always, please send us your feedback, countyboard@arlingtonva.us. Otherwise, the board is now adjourned. Thank you.